Welcome to the CR Dynamics Podcast. I'm Chad Rauch, operations leader, founder, and someone who believes the most important thing you can build is a business that is designed to win from day one. Today's guest has spent 40 years proving that great innovation does not happen fast. It happens right. Dr. Dan Cohen is a neurologist, serial entrepreneur, and the man behind Breather, the nasal strip that went from a Band-Aid with a plastic glued on top to a product that changed how millions of people. He did not stop there. For 25 years, he's been working on something far more ambitious, a non-invasive technology that targets the brainstem to reduce chronic stress, restore deep sleep, and potentially reverse nerve damage in conditions that the medical community has largely given up on. Today, we are going to cover three things: how he recognized a $566 million idea the moment he saw it, what it takes to build a medical technology company when the science does not yet exist, and the exit planning model he developed that makes investors sit up straight because most founders never think about it that. Dan, thank you for being here today.
Pleasure to be here, Chad.
So, going to jump right in. Kind of the first question that comes to mind. You got a very compelling story. You've been doing this since 1982. But before Breathe Right, before Soltec, there was a company called CNS. A guy named Bruce who walked you into the office one day with a briefcase. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, I can tell you the exact day it happened. It was October 11th, 1991. My VP of operations had made the introduction. Bruce wanted to meet somebody to discuss his idea. And essentially, you could tell he was a very nice guy, a little bit shy. And you got the sense that his idea was one that other people looked at and thought was a little silly. But as he discussed it, because he didn't show me the prototype right away, but as he discussed it, it was very apparent to me as a physician who had been doing a lot of work in sleep that this would be a very, very valuable aid. And I liked it in particular because his story indicated something that was typical of patients that had this kind of problem. He was a person with a deviated septum, so he couldn't breathe well through one side of his nose. He was regularly congested. He snored. And when you have that situation, you end up resorting typically to nasal sprays, which are addictive. And you have to go on and off of them, and then when you go off of them you have rebound congestion. And this guy he's a tinkerer, he's an inventor himself, and as a result he had worked with a lot of things inside the nose to try to alleviate the condition, but the discomfort was too great, and he'd gotten to the point where he was running out of ideas, and finally thought that, hey, you know what, if I build this thing on the surface of my nose and have the pull of force outward, maybe that would be a benefit. And so he was describing his history to me, and it made all the sense in the world. And then I asked him, I said, hey, Bruce, I said, you think I could see it? He went into his briefcase and he took it out, but he put it on his side of the table. And I said, you think I could touch it? And he handed it to me. And it was a Curad Band-Aid with a piece of plastic glued on top. And as soon as I saw it, I said, that's brilliant. When you think about that kind of product, it's simple, it's cheap, it's drug-free, it's non-addictive. What's wrong with it? Not much. And I was faced with a conundrum. What do you do as a publicly held capital medical equipment company, and you're presented with what will be a consumer product that for most people sounds absolutely ridiculous? That was the problem. So what do you do when faced with that conundrum?
That it's very simplistic, right? Sometimes the simplest ideas come across in the best ways. But so you licensed it on the spot, right? You kind of said, I'm gonna take this on. What did you know in that moment that your board of directors didn't?
A couple things happened. On the front end, as he was telling me his story, and when he got to the point where he said, this is a mechanical device, I like the fact that it was a device and it was drug-free. Huge advantage. Just think about it. Imagine the pharmacy shelf filled with drugs. And now you've got something that is a non-drug and immediately safe. And I still knew we would have to take it through the FDA because
Yeah.
it was novel. And so it was considered a class 2 medical device, but we had a lot of experience doing that kind of thing. But there was something else that happened that was quite unusual, something I had never experienced before. After I understood that, it was like a small video went off in my head. It was entirely unique for me.
Yeah.
It was a different experience altogether. And it happened when he handed me the product. It was like I could see football players wearing it. I saw the design of the product. I saw our stock chart go up. But Chad, to be perfectly honest, that was a real breakthrough for me because I don't know, without getting that inspiration, I don't know that I would have had the guts to carry through over the next couple of years and make it happen. It was bizarre, but it was one of these unusual occurrences that was kind of magical.
It's funny that not funny that you mentioned that, but sometimes those epiphany moments come out of nowhere you're least expected, right? And they
Yeah.
propel you down great paths. The Breathe Right went on, obviously we mentioned it to, and I was just in the drugstore this past weekend fighting this cold, and what was on the shelf, the Breathe Right, next to the antihistamines and the cold relievers and the nose spray, so it's kind of one of those things. But the lesson that you seem to carry from that into everything you build now is not about the success. It's about recognizing the idea before anybody else does. What does that actually look like as a skill, though? Because not everybody can spot out that diamond in the rough.
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I think for different people, there's probably different ways that they do it. Some people are very analytical and they're mental and can tell you, I used to be like that. I'm very left brain. I've learned over the years when you're presented with new stuff, it really pays to set aside all of your biases. Say, hey, you know what? Don't make a quick judgment. And then I tend to turn into myself at that point, and I don't just think about it. I also try to feel it.
Okay.
There's a difference, for instance, between thinking and knowing. Thinking is a mental process, and knowing is more of a felt sense. And so
There.
I tend to rely on how does this thing feel? I don't do that right away. I don't do that off the bat. I start
Yeah.
by saying, okay, try to understand it first. I try to keep an open mind. I try to
Mhm.
listen. There's nobody who knows more about a new idea than the inventor, right?
Good point.
And it's no different when I was a doctor and I would see patients. When it comes to their condition, they're the expert. Okay, so just shut up and listen. See what they have to say and get a sense. Are they real? Does this make sense? Do they believe what they're saying? If it's true, what does it mean? In other words, how do the symptoms manifest and what do they tell you about a diagnosis? It's no different than an inventor with an idea. Does the idea make sense and does it have practical applicability? Is it going to fit a business model that makes some sense? So it's that open mindedness and that receptivity. Give you I'll give you a clue towards greater success
Okay.
is as a neurologist, I'll say, hey, you know what? Brain is a powerful thing, but you're better off, in my opinion, using it to create questions and let the answers come to you. It's a different
Interesting.
way
So,
of looking at things. And almost everybody I know does the opposite. They use the brain to try to solve the problem rather than create questions and then listen for the answers.
kind of almost reconstructing the problem. Ask what the problem is first, and
Yeah.
then let that discovery, the five whys type scenario. Why does
Yeah.
this? Why does that? And it gets down to eventually the root cause of some sort of issue. But I can understand. I can see how your perspective is from that. The thing that came across on that is you don't judge a book by its cover right off the bat. Some guy
No.
coming in with a band-aid and plastic tape on top, you might think he's out there a little bit, but when you understand what he's trying to solve, it's actually brilliant.
Yeah.
You don't take that off the phrase cover. So that's if that pattern goes. What's something that you take that? What is there something that has gotten better at the age of over 40 years, or is it the same instinct that you've had since 91? Is it something that you've honed and grown, or is it just always been there?
No, I think there was probably an element of it, but it is something I've grown. A lot of it is don't jump to conclusions like you alluded to. Some of it is develop even greater patience. In other words, clamp your lips shut for a while and listen. The other thing is to make a product successful, there's a whole lot of things that have to happen. And you need to start understanding the different angles. Another guy
Okay.
came to me a couple years later with an idea that on the surface was, so what? But as I let him talk, he was a biochemist, and he had developed a new product that was a laxative. And
Okay.
when I said it was Metamucil, there's other stuff out there. Why take on this product? And as I listened to him, and he told me something that right away got me interested. He said the substance in this is sweet, and so it tastes good. I said, "Oh my God, it's like candy." Okay. And then he said, "It's not a powder, so you don't have to sit and mix it with water." And I thought about that and I said, "That's kind of nice. You could form it into, back then it would be a chewable tablet. Today it would be a
Okay.
gummy." And, I said, "Well,
Evolution.
that's nice." And the one thing that really hit me, which is not, doesn't make sense around the thread I'm weaving right now, was, oh, what's really cool about this is we can put it on the shelf right next to Metamucil. Everybody goes to Metamucil to buy product. If they see this right next to it, and we can make the same claims, and you don't have to mix it with water, and Metamucil is annoying to have to take, then we can get sales and we wouldn't have to spend much money. So I looked at it as we already have distribution. We already have brokers that call on 40,000 stores. If I take on the product, I got a biochemist here who's going to basically formulate it, take care of the manufacturing. All I'm going to have to do is get it on the shelf. People will compare it to Metamucil and say, I'm going to give it a try. So the marketing costs, because when you launch a consumer product, it's all about how do you control your marketing costs. And so
Yeah.
the thing that persuaded me on that product was unbelievable. No or little marketing cost to get the thing going. Here's a product that can be profitable from just about the get-go.
Interesting. So it's finding the angle, not
Yeah,
necessarily the right product. It's a different take. A product, the Breathe Right was the product that you so like the idea, boom, okay, this can take off. Different thing is we have already existing. This is a supplement to that. Just piggyback on it. So it's
yeah,
the
right.
piggyback marketing strategy, I guess you could say.
Because we already had the distribution capability. So getting the product into distribution was great. The category is already built. There was no breather category.
That's true.
Okay. And so here was a category that had been in existence for years, and we were an easier, tastier solution. Just take one of these tablets, chew it, tastes good. It's made of inulin, which is a sweet substance. And oh, by
Okay.
the way, if you go on the shelves today, you'll see that Procter and Gamble, who makes Metamucil, they now have an inulin gummy.
When they say that the imitation is the best case of
Form of
flattery.
flattery. Yeah, yeah,
So the that kind of leads us into kind of where you're at today and what you've been doing for the past 25 years, so to speak. And most people know that stress is bad for them, right? But what they don't know is that 70 to 90% of all medical conditions are either caused or made worse by chronic stress.
yeah.
You told me in our pre-call and it stopped me cold. Explain what chronic stress is actually doing to the body and then why it's essentially flying blind on it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a real problem. I learned that fact in medical school, and I would ask my professors, hey, why aren't we treating this as a primary pathology if it wreaks such havoc on the body? And they had good answers, and they were very legitimate, and there was no good way to treat it other than with behavioral techniques. Drugs had a lot of side effects to affect the part of the nervous system that's causing this problem. And so it was about, we got to get into this in a more deep fashion. But to answer your question, it was extremely well established why chronic stress wreaks havoc. All right. You have chronic increases in cortisol, which is essentially an anti-inflammatory agent that your adrenal creates. But when you have it on a chronic basis, your body adapts and you get an increased inflammatory state everywhere. And that causes problems everywhere. You end up with problems in most of your organ systems, and it just depends on your own susceptibility as to what's going to manifest. But you're going to manifest lots of different diseases due to chronic stress.
And you said if people were in that 85th percentile and it's going to kill them, they would do something about it. But why doesn't medicine give people that number? As a person, hey, you tell me you're at this high end. We go back to children when they go into the doctor's visit, when they're babies, they tell you the height and weight, the head, what percentile they're in, the growth factor. But as adults, they don't tell us that. They just go, oh, you're high. We'll see in a year. But why do you think they don't talk about that in that type of level?
I think it's because stress over the years, it's been forever, is such a nebulous phenomenon. If I say stress to 10 people, they think about, yeah, psychologically I'm stressed, I experience it physically, but mostly it's emotional. And so people think of stress as being the equivalent of anxiety, and it's an emotional problem. So, number one, most people don't tie it to the body and to illness. Okay. Other thing is, if you ask people, where do you think your stress ranks versus the general population? People don't have any clue as to where they stand, and therefore the likelihood that they're going to produce disease from their stress. So if stress is so prevalent that if you were to build sort of a Gaussian curve, it would look just like that. Most people are in the middle, but if you're on the far right and have extreme stress, you probably don't know it because you've become so accustomed to the level of stress that you experience that you're only comparing it to yourself. Okay. But you yourself may have been chronically stressed for so many years that you think you're normal.
You kind of get stuck with the rationale that's, like you said, that's normal. But if you don't have that comparison, how do you know what the baseline is? And
And and it's not, look, you can measure a cortisol level, but it's not the kind of thing that physicians could use to determine whether or not you have chronic stress because you could just be stressed over the past couple of days. So it's not a metric that works. A lot of the psychiatric profiles, the different questionnaires, they say this is over the past 2 weeks. And so it becomes one of those things where if you have a more extreme anxiety disorder, if you have PTSD, that becomes a medical condition and then you treat those accordingly. But still, the underlying physical manifestations tend not to be treated first and foremost until they develop. That's the issue. It's such a it's such a pervasive thing that it's accepted as sort of part of your baseline.
you can see that in almost like a day-to-day life aspects of things where it's okay, you get up, you're living with it, you get stuck in that norm. You mentioned in our previous call the seesaw, that fight or flight versus the rest and digest. Everybody lives that fight or flight. Get up, go to work, fight the battles at work, go home, fight the battles at home with the kids, maybe get rest, but we never have the time to relax. Is that kind of that analogy that we're talking about there? That kind of that in that chronic level that you just don't know. You've been fighting it for so long.
That's right. You become accustomed to your level, and you only know typically on a relative basis how stressed you are compared to how stressed you were a week ago. Or, a lot of people will think back to their youth And if they didn't have a troubled youth, they'll say, yeah, you know what? I didn't think about stress then. I was relaxed. I was having fun. I was a kid. And then I got older and I got married and we had financial issues, we had kids, and there's issues there. And
Yeah.
I didn't like my job. And let's face it, bottom line is life tends to be pretty hard across the board. Life's not easy for the vast majority of people. And as a result, we all experience stress, but we experience it to different levels.
No, agree. And I think it's the culture that you see now these days is the influencer culture. And I'll put it to that level where everybody wants to keep up with the Joneses. They see what they see on TV, they see where that's at, and that puts more stress on you because now you gotta, why aren't I like them? Or your kids see that and they want that, so that just it keeps building up, and you just don't realize it. But I see, going back to that diagnosis you talked about, that baseline. It's hard to get that percentage. That's the same problem I've seen in manufacturing for many years. You cannot improve what you don't measure, and if you don't understand that baseline, companies that run on a gut feel instead of data are the ones that get surprised, right? You got to have data behind all your decisions. And essentially, that diagnostic gap is exactly the kind of things where organizations I've helped in the past on. So that's kind of just a good thing there that you want to touch on. But you started the project in 1997. So switching a little bit further, it took 15 years to figure out and another 10 to refine it. You named the company Round River Research because you knew from the start it was going to be like navigating a river. And I love this story, how you talked about it. Learning one thing per loop, that constant circle. What did you learn in year one that you still use today?
What makes you think I can remember year one? I think one of the things I knew going in and confirmed in year one is we needed to develop something that would do it to you in terms of helping you relax. I confirmed that. We had developed a test group and we studied them in terms of how they tried to relax. And most people use different behavioral techniques. They try to breathe more and exhale slowly, or they try to do muscle relaxation, or they keep repeating a phrase in their head like a mantra. And so they do things to distract them or try to affect the body one way or another. And we found that those techniques, look, it's not that they don't work, it's just that they work slowly. And for you to really develop a very relaxed state, if things work slowly, people give up. And the vast majority of people give up on meditation and relaxation techniques. So those kind of techniques, they work, but they're not practical. Okay, that's the bottom line there. And then if you have to go deeper, and then you have to go to a psychologist and have some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive work done to understand your defense mechanisms, your coping strategies. And a lot of people just don't like that. And guess what? That takes a long time too. So we decided the best route was try to develop some technology.
And that's where you built vibroacoustics?
Yeah, we started out, there were two neurologic, techniques, I should say, that we understood from a neurologic standpoint. One is called habituation. In other words, if you overwhelm the primary senses, which is vision, hearing, touch, you give them the same stimulus again and again, as long as the stimulus is pleasant, the brain, the cortex that serve those functions, those sensory functions, they basically say, hey, you know what? I can't decipher anything else because I'm preoccupied with this sensory bombardment. And so I'm going to inhibit my cortex. And that naturally turns the brain off to a significant degree. Because remember, the brain's primary function is survival. Okay, so it uses those three sensory modalities to constantly, consciously and subconsciously scan the environment for potential danger. And so when you shut those areas down, you're no longer scanning. So your level of vigilance drops and you relax. So we started with vibroacoustics, put somebody in a quiet, dark room, have them shut their eyes, lie down, relax, and then play music that they can hear and feel. I mean,
Okay.
they can hear it through speakers. And if you have a speaker that has a mass loaded cone, when it moves up and down, it creates vibration and attach that to the platform. And so now you shut off vision because your eyes are closed. You're hearing this music and you make it so that it's really not something you're going to pay attention to, but it's not obnoxious in any way. It's pleasant. So we made multi-layered, non-vocal music, which was very pleasant and relaxing, but it was not something you would follow because you had interweaving layers of just music without any kind of vocals. And then we would add enough bass so that we would create a big speaker with a pound of aluminum in the cone. So you'd get those frequencies resonating through the platform. And that was a magical element. That really caused a lot of relaxation.
That relaxation and meditation are what you said before in the past is that they regenerate, they restore a lot of things.
Yeah.
Why don't more people take that into effect? You hear of all these meditation places now where they're trying to get everybody in these spaces, but it doesn't seem like it's taking mainstream. People want to get into a deep sleep, and you said it lasts 36 hours, but people that are stressed out don't have 3 hours a week. It's kind of counterintuitive. So if you had to pivot the entire spec into 2 words, multitasking meditation, how would you make that call when you've already invested years in almost the wrong direction, I guess you could say? Not saying you weren't, but if we don't have time to get to that state, how do we get to that state if we can't focus?
Yeah. What we experienced was we got people where we started working with people, first of all, that were willing to commit 3 hours a week. But 3 hours a week is a bit of a lie because it was 3 hours of actual therapy, but they had to come to us. Then they had their hour, then they had to leave. Okay. Yeah. So that 3 hours could be easily 6 hours. All right. So now you're investing 6 hours a week. That's a significant chunk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you think about it, it's almost a whole day.
Because I think it's the prep time. Any type of in a business, you go into a meeting, you got to spend some time prepping. And then you have the meeting. Then after the meeting, you have time to digest what the meeting was about. Yeah. And then you got to prepare for the next one. So the time element of things. Now, is that something that you think adds more stress to people?
Yeah, well, that's what we found. We ended up, first we worked with people just to see, will this level of stress alleviate physical conditions that they've developed as a result of stress? So first we wanted to prove that hypothesis, and we did. We worked with people that had stress-related illnesses, and after getting them into a profoundly relaxed state for a series of months, their illnesses subsided. I remember one woman who she came to us because her doctors had given up on her. She was on every asthma medication that was available, and she was still having breakthrough asthmatic attacks, and where she would become cyanotic. Literally, that's how bad it was. These were life-threatening, wow, situations. And she was a young woman in her 30s, and she was desperate. So she was willing to commit the time. Yeah. Because she didn't have a choice. And so she came to us 3 days a week. We saw her Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We did an hour-long session. And over the next 9 months, she was able to wean off of all of her medications and not have any asthma attacks.
That's amazing. Just from the meditation and the vibroacoustics.
The vibroacoustics, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. But we saw other people that had similar results from different conditions, whether they were Crohn's disease, gout, but all stress-related conditions that if you get rid of the stress, the illness goes away. All right. So let me tell you what happened. So in essence, we thought we had a winner in terms of, hey, this product's going to work. We had intellectual property. We had created patents in the Twin Cities area where I'm located. There's a bunch of medical professionals that are interested in holistic medicine. And so we gathered them together. We basically said, hey, look, we want to work with a group of you. We got 50 people to sign up. We supplied them with units. And then we watched what happened over the next couple of years. And what we found was people will not spend that amount of time in general to undergo that form of therapy. And so before really commercializing it and spending money on a big marketing campaign, we said it's going to be a failure.
And so we talked about what we learned on lesson on year one to fast forwarding a bit to what did you have to completely throw out? And it was basically pretty much the whole story.
We
Not the
learned some
story,
other
but
things. We learned
yeah.
some other things that weren't related that came into play later, but
Mhm.
they were, let's just say they were, most people would consider them strange. Okay. Okay. It'll help me in my next project. All right. So it was worth learning it, but it was by the same token not helpful for that
For that
project.
application or that, but it's a journey, right? Everything builds upon itself to get where you're at, and these little discoveries, these little things lead us off to kind of down to where you're at today.
Mhm.
And explain a little bit about now how those early interactions led you into what you're undertaking now with the whole complete system. You mentioned Garmin told you no about the fancy little devices that everybody now has, from their iWatches to their Samsung Galaxy things that does all the breathing and kind of all the sleep traction. But how did that lessons learned lead you to your new endeavor?
It was a particular case. A person I had done some business with called me up and he took me out to lunch and he disclosed that he had terminal renal cell carcinoma. And he'd been part of a drug study, a Pfizer drug study, and the drug was meant to retard the growth of the cancer. Okay, it wasn't going to take it away, but it was to basically hold it stationary. And it was a 24 case study. And the other 23 people had already died. So the
Okay.
drug wasn't working all that well. All right. But he was the last survivor. But he was 4.5 years into the study. So
Oh,
he'd been on
really?
this,
Okay.
yeah. And he had a 6 centimeter tumor in his left kidney and he had some metastases in his lung. Okay. But it was holding it steady. Right.
Okay.
Okay. So he was their biggest success. But what happened was he developed a chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy. And so he was on this course where every 4 weeks, it was a 6 week course, 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and that would repeat. Okay.
Okay.
And he had gotten to the point where every time he would start on his 4 weeks on, he would develop this terrible peripheral neuropathy so that he'd gotten to the point where even by the end of week 2, his hands were so bad that he couldn't button his shirt and couldn't go to work. And so he, in essence, surpassed the exclusion criteria where they had to take him off. And they were frankly happy to end the study because he was the last guy alive. And so they
Yeah.
informed him that, hey, you know what? Get your affairs in order. We have to end the study. We can't give you the drug anymore because you're past the limit of side effects. So he came to me and he said, hey, can your technology help me? And the vibroacoustics. And I said, well, it's not going to hurt you. I said, just come into
Right.
the office. We'll set you up over lunch and we'll see what happens. What really surprised me is over 3 months, we eradicated his peripheral neuropathy. The
Amazing.
peripheral neuropathy, a chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy is not stress related. So wait a minute. This makes no sense whatsoever. I could not explain it. After another 2 months, it was time for his every 6 month CT scan to measure the tumor growth. So he went in for that. And guess what? All the tumors were gone. So
Really?
his cancer was gone. That didn't surprise me because we've had other people with profound stress reduction that had their cancers clear up. Because remember, you're getting rid of the inflammation, and the body is designed to heal itself. So the cancer cure was, I could explain that. I could not explain the peripheral neuropathy. So I remember when we got to the point where we said, something's happening here. We don't understand about our vibroacoustics. So we took it apart. We sat down with the engineers and we took every element of it apart and we said, what aren't we seeing here? And we realized that the way we coupled the bass speaker that had the mass loaded cone to the bottom of in this instance, it was a reclining chair, the base of the seat, there was a big rubber grommet between the attachment, and it was producing a low frequency vibration. And you got this big magnet at the back end of the speaker. So we said, maybe it's this low frequency stuff. And so we took the transducer off, we put it on a platform, attached it to a signal generator and a motor, and started moving it up and down at different frequencies to see what kind of effect it would have. And sure enough, that was the breakthrough that led to our current technology.
That is a very interesting and amazing story. How somebody comes in for one thing, leads into something different that can be transformative down the road. And while you're saying that, one thing that popped in my mind over matter, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard that before. It's like the mind is a very powerful tool. They say 10% of what we use at best, and that's quoting some probably scientific story back in my early days, so I don't even know if that's true these days, but that's amazing how just going into one thing, and goes back to what we were talking about, the meditation and how chronic stress and how all that can kind of feel itself out or work itself out. That's an amazing story. So you mentioned that 85% of companies trying to raise a Series A right now are failing, right? You're a fundraiser period yourself. You're in that fundraising period. What is actually broken about current fundraising market for companies like Soltec?
Well,
What did you have to do to work around that?
well, actually, we're trying to work through it. So we haven't really worked around it entirely.
Okay.
We may become one of the fatalities. Okay, one of those 85%. It's very conceivable. My partner and I put in a lot of money into the research, and we don't have any more money to put in. We did raise $16 million over the years from friends, family, angel investors. Our kind of deal is not the kind of deal you present to venture capitalists because those funds typically last 10 years. And as you mentioned, we've been at this for 25 years. They're not going to fund something that's so research oriented because they hate to return stock to their investors. All right.
Yeah.
They want to have the deal closed and disperse cash. So VCs were out, which was fine because I had worked with VCs for many years and I wasn't interested in working with them anyway. But there comes a point when you exhaust your pool of investors. And so for us, it was, boy, we need an alternative group of investors that have a different slant. They have a different interest in something.
Okay.
And so I decided I got to find a different product that's related that can be a big hit and form another company and then do a joint offering. This is how extreme that you have to go sometimes to form or to get money. Because in this market, the past 3 years, fundraising in the US has been nearly impossible. I know a lot of angel investors that are supporting 5, 6, 7 companies and they don't have any more money to put in. And the companies can't raise money because things have changed. The VCs like to invest in groups and they like to invest a lot of money. A lot of Series A investment doesn't involve a lot of money. So again, VCs lose interest. Family offices have become more like VCs. The level of due diligence is high. It's not easy to reach family offices. And an investment bank is not going to work with you typically, or a lot of the tier 3 investment banks, they do such a lousy job that you're not going to raise the money. We tried that over 2 years. We worked with a couple different investment banks. It's not that they raised nothing. They didn't even put investors in front of me to pitch.
Really?
Yeah, it's a lot of sham out there, and so because and in the past 20 years, these investment banks the number of them has shrunk because they've all merged. So it's become very difficult. So fundraising in the United States right now is abominable. So what we've done is we've literally formed another company related to an entirely different product. One day, a friend of mine called me up and he said, "Hey, look," he says, "a guy we know, he's got a lot of ideas, but he needs some help because he needs some help with execution. It's the person is a creative type, but you would never ask him to run a business." And he acknowledges that. He's been through the mill, and he had created a big success in the past. But he knows he's not the kind of person you put in the boardroom. He's not the kind of person who's in the C-suite. He likes to go out and talk and sell and promote. That's his forte, and he's great at that. So I sat and I listened to him for a couple hours, and the reason they brought me in is because he was talking about stress relief. But I had already decided that market was really too hard to penetrate. So he was pitching to the wrong guy. And I told him, I said, that's not going to work. So he says, I've got other ideas. And this guy was known in the mouth guard industry. He started a company when he was very young called Easy Guard, and that became the Shock Doctor brand. So this is the guy who started Shock Doctor, essentially.
Okay.
And okay. And so he says, I got this idea about putting a camera in a mouth guard. And I said, oh, I really like that idea. That's really cool because you get the player's point of view and it's up close and personal. You add a microphone, so now you have audio, video. If I'm watching a football player and I can hear them and see things close up, I'm going to literally feel it because those senses come together in the brain in terms of vision, hearing, touch. It's an entirely new broadcast content. So right away, I fell in love with the idea, and I said to him, I said, this guy's name's John. I said, John, did you patent it? He goes, oh, no, I didn't patent it. I said, are there patents out there on this? He goes, I don't know. I don't think so. I said, it's kind of like a GoPro. And he goes, yeah, it's in a mouth guard. And I said, all right, let me look into it. So sure enough, it took 5 minutes, and I found an incredibly good patent out there that covered this thing that was 10 years old. So there was still plenty of life on it. And I couldn't figure out how to contact the inventor. There was no business formed around it. And it took me a day to find on the internet an old business plan. And I couldn't still contact the inventor, but I was able to contact his prior business partner.
Okay.
And I said, all right, 4 days later, I was talking to the inventor and we had a 3-hour conversation and he agreed to license the patent to me. It was like the Bruce story.
Something just comes across and you think about it, but I like how the angle, how you feel into it. You ever see a baseball game and they have they're sliding into second or something? You see those camera angles, or the pylon cameras now they have those type of things. It puts you in there. It's kind of like a 4D movie in a sense. Now you just got to have the splash and the vibrating chair. You can feel the impact.
Right. I imagine you're the running back, and you're juking and moving and running and hitting somebody, bouncing off of him. Imagine you're in the middle of a fumble.
The scrum down at the bottom. I don't know if that might not be safe for television though. What's going on down there at the bottom of the.
But nobody's ever seen it.
Exactly. Yeah. I was watching. Have you ever seen the movie F1 on Apple TV?
Yeah.
When they're sitting in there, they're driving the camera. I mean, you've seen a lot of, I think, Days of Thunder kind of goes back in my mind back in the day. But the way it looked like they were like flying. The way the cars go through, I can see that exactly being the same type of scenario with just the mouthpiece.
What I liked about this is there was synergy with what we've developed, because what we've developed, also works for sleep. And we've seen an increase in deep sleep, which is restorative and increases performance. And so it was a really nice angle. And I'm very familiar with the sports stuff with Breather. That's how I launched Breather with football players. And the whole thing was natural. Let's bring these two companies together. and start with a joint offering, which we're doing right now. We've got an offering on the street, and I'm starting to talk to investors who like the idea. They see the synergy, and some of them are sports related investors. Some of them are interested in what we're doing with our neuromodulation technology, and they can see what the synergy is. And so there's a higher likelihood that we're going to be able to raise money. And I've got a new type of investor to talk to. That's you can't get a hit unless you get up at the plate. Now I'm finally seeing,
Yeah.
new potential investors to present to.
No, you're opening your market a bit, right? You're a fisherman now has a bigger net
Yeah,
instead
I
of that
mean,
one little.
most people have mergers between companies. Now
Yeah.
we're essentially merging a company, quasi merging a company to raise capital.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's very progressive in a sense of kind of thinking forward on how the best way to promote both.
Well,
You're carrying the one brand, the core, so to speak, and what else can help prevent that forward? Finding synergies.
a lot of people that invest, or even VC funds that invest in startups or seed rounds or early rounds of companies, they figure they're going to do really well if they get one or two successes out of 10. And so here, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, you know what? You buy this, we're selling a unit, so you get shares in both. And we're saying, look, if either one of these is successful, you're at 1 out of 2. If they're both successful, that's 2 out of 2.
You
So,
know,
and oh, the other thing is, Chad, that's really interesting about this, same management team. So there's great efficiencies and same infrastructure.
you have a lower cost overhead structure, so the return on the investments can be greater. You're not paying double the overhead. The margins are improved. It kind of reminds me of what you see now if you watch ESPN. They're promoting their ESPN, what's that? Their bet, ESPN bet. The parlay, if you get two of these hit and you double your money kind of scenario. So
Yeah.
it's jumping on mainstream activities in a different pool, different type of things. But if we come back full circle, we started this on how you get into it, and you're getting the funding for your current venture, kind of getting there. That seems to be at the light. But let's talk about you don't go into something if you don't know how to get out of it, right? That exit planning. And you brought this up to me is that the three words: exclusivity, scarcity, and inevitability. Walk me through what each of those means and why most founders never think about it until it's too late. And too late usually means you're dead in the water.
Yeah, what I've learned over the years is, and I think most founders understand this right away, exclusivity. You got to build a moat around what you're developing so that somebody else can't just copy it. Because if you're going to build something that's successful and you don't have protection, then anybody else can say, "Hey, look, they're successful. Let's just build that. We've got better distribution, and we'll knock the other guy out of the market." True inventiveness means that you should be able to secure some level of intellectual property. And so I think that's common. I think everybody understands that concept. Scarcity is not something people think about, okay? Especially when you think about an exit strategy. People don't understand what scarcity even means, okay? Scarcity means that typically you've developed a couple platform technologies that can expand and there's some level of synergy. And so when you go to sell it, you're going to be able to track the number of companies, and in an auction process, you're going to get a better price. Because what's going to happen is one company's not going to want to see a competitor buy it. So now there's fear of missing out and fear of losing your market share. So we've developed we're developing these platform technologies that could have multiple products that erupt from them. And again, they can be used to protect a larger business that some of the bigger businesses have, like smartphones, for instance. Smartphones are trying to build greater and greater ecosystems around their smartphones because they're most concerned with their smartphone businesses. Half of Apple's business is their iPhone.
Yeah.
The leading business within Samsung is, most years, their phones, their smartphones. And then they built wearables around that as part of their ecosystem. But what's interesting about wearables is they're monitors, but they don't provide any therapy. Now, I talk to people all the time that use a wearable, and they more and more of them are getting frustrated because they say, yeah, my wearable makes me feel bad because it tells them I'm sleeping poorly, but it doesn't do anything to fix it. But here we have a device that fixes it. So you're going to start seeing the wearable companies pretty soon say, hey, you know what? We need an associated therapeutic. So we're building out a number of therapeutics. Even the camera and a mouth guard product, that's associated with a smartphone because you'll run it that an amateur will run it that way. It'll send the video to the smartphone. You'll post it on Instagram or TikTok to show people what you do. Imagine if you're a high school athlete and wants a college scholarship, you'll create your own portfolio of videos that you can share close up and personal. That kind of thing will happen. And oh,
Your
by the
juke
way,
move.
by having exclusivity, having a good intellectual property where you enable the capture of this kind of AV content, now you can license that ability to the leagues. That's a huge source of revenue. So when you think about scarcity, to me, that's my favorite part of this. Everybody understands exclusivity. And the other thing that is inevitability. Inevitability is you don't need, if you know the particular targets that you want to buy your company, okay? You don't have to build a big business. In fact, they don't want you to build a big business because they won't be able to afford to buy you. All right. What you want to do is you want to build a business that demonstrates that it's inevitable that this can turn into a big business. So you just have to prove that the market is there and that it can be exploited. So again, it's not about, I don't have to spend $100 million on marketing to develop a big business because the big guys are going to want to buy you before you get big.
Very true point. It's easier to grab something in a startup than it is the large merger. The large merger that pops in my mind is you had the Warner Brothers, Paramount.
Yeah.
That's billions and billions of dollars, a lot more zeros than I feel like writing down at any given moment. But what are the hurdles that happen across that? You start out when you're smaller, it's a smaller purchase. You don't get as many red flags. So
we built a big business with Breather and GlaxoSmithKline. We were somewhere in the $90 million range when we sold. And they had to pay $566 million for it. That's obscene in my mind. And so if we show that, hey, the potential here is to build with these platforms to build a business that's going to be $1 billion, but we're only at 10 million, they're not going to pay us like it's $1 billion business, but they're going to be willing to pay a lot of money.
Yeah, they pay on like you said, the inevitability, the multiplier effect to get to where it's going to be.
And if you have scarcity and you can attract a bunch of bidders, you're gonna increase the value of what these people want to buy.
Like you mentioned it, the fear of missing out. I can see everybody in a room holding their paddles up, going back and forth because, oh, I don't want Jane over here to get it, but then Joe gets it, so you just keep increasing.
And the reason we form two different entities is because somebody may come in and say, I just want to buy one. It's already disarticulated from the other. I think what's going to happen in my mind is, assuming that we get funded and we continue to develop this stuff, is somebody will come in and say, no, I want to buy both.
Okay. And then you're all set up, ready to go.
Yeah.
No, that's perfect. But you mentioned before, most large companies don't want to innovate, they acquire. You said that you identify companies that want to sell and you want to sell and the why. Who is on the list of Soltec and makes them the right buyer for you? Have you identified who would be a good fit? Who you want to sell to?
Yeah, I think when you look at the smartphone wearable companies, they all become good candidates.
Okay.
We have our technology is considered in the neuromodulation category. And so there are three big players there, Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston Scientific. I think they'll be interested. I think that because we deal with sleep, we can help sleep. Now you've got companies like ResMed and Philips that already are deep into that market. Some of the drug companies that are moving more device oriented will be interested in that kind of stuff. Sleep is also a performance thing. So when you look at that and you look at the camera and a mouth guard, now you've got all sorts of people, Nike and a whole bunch of other players that would be interested in that. New broadcast media, you've got companies like basically the different media companies, would all
Yeah.
be interested in that, in addition to other people that are around, surround that market. So there's a lot of companies to choose from to bring to the table to see who wants to pay what for what.
You mentioned the sports. When I see you got a picture up there, I think that's Jerry Rice on your wall. Looks to be signed.
It is. Yeah.
So I can definitely see where a higher end athlete would take this to the next level and say, okay, I can spend my waking hours in the gym refining my movements, but what do I do in the time where I know I need to recoup my body? And you mentioned earlier on that deep sleep, that restorative sleep, that not a lot of people, the average Joes, don't get to because chronic stress and everything builds up. But those high performers are going to want to get into that. And I can see that as being a very attractive avenue for some of the younger ones. The other thing that popped in my mind when you mentioned the mouth guard and the broadcasting rights is used to be the XFL. I think now it's the UFL, kind of where they're merging and they always try to do a little something different. But I could see that as being in there as a, all right, we're gonna turn the mouth cam on and see what the running back does and find the scrum at the bottom. I can see that as an attractive alternative to that league. They're
Yeah.
trying to compete for the spring market, so to speak, with baseball, but
Yeah.
football's still popular. Here's another avenue to draw the casual viewer to go, hey, I want to see something unique.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you talk about sleep and performance and delta sleep, what most people don't realize, if I said to you, what's the most common sleep problem? You'd think about it for a while and you'd probably say insomnia. Is that fair? The most
Yeah,
common,
yeah. You can't fall asleep. You don't sleep good. You're wide awake, tossing and turning all night.
and some people would say sleep apnea is pretty prevalent too. I'll tell you, both of those are not the most common sleep problem.
Really?
By far and away, the most common sleep problem is aging. Because as we age, we lose deep sleep. Okay? When you lose deep sleep, your whole sleep falls apart. And guess when that starts? This is going to
Early.
really, I'm sorry, what?
I would say early on because
Yeah.
we don't get younger. We only get older.
Believe it or not, it starts in your 20s.
Wow.
So when I talk to athletes that are in their 30s, they already know. I'm talking about professional athletes.
Yeah.
They say, yeah, I'm not sleeping anywhere near like I was in my 20s. Okay, this is really important. So you start using this with athletes in their 20s, and they're going to preserve more of that tissue. This may extend their careers a few years. That's really, and also before that, their performance will be higher.
Yeah.
So you look at these professional athletes or even college athletes who can guarantee themselves a better night's sleep, you're going to see that. But by the same token, there's a lot of people that play in athletics that are amateurs. From a performance standpoint, why not?
On Thursday nights, I play softball. Friday mornings, my legs are killing me because I'm not used to running that 60-foot sprint from home plate to first base because fortunately I'm not that great of a hitter and I don't hit it that I got to work on my angle. Do you have anything that works on the angle, the trajectory of the ball? Because it's always the shortstop, and I'm trying to beat the throw, and then but it goes into that. I'm in my late 40s, but that deep sleep, that restorative, it takes you a couple days to get back into that. So you mentioned the pickleballers, these new part-time athletes, these amateurs, but they take it serious and they would love to have that recovery time. They'd love to get back out there more. And I could just see that as being, if it's that simple to use, you have your little wearable, you have your device under the bed, which we didn't really talk about what the device is a whole lot. Talked about the formulation of it and the theory behind it, but I think it's practical. It's not, you think of the sleep apnea, and my mom has this, and the mask. Why did I hate it? And you got to put the water and all that. It's intrusive in a sense, but you're just got a vibrating plate, for layman's terms, underneath your bed.
Oh no, it's not a vibrating plate. Actually, there's two magnets in aluminum tubes, and there's motors attached, and they spin at different rates to stimulate the part of the nervous system that is involved with sleep, but it uses different frequencies for the different stages of sleep. And so the wearable determines what stage of sleep you're in. It sends a Bluetooth signal to the generator under the bed. It says, hey, change the frequency. The generator changes it and makes about 40 to 50 adjustments throughout the night to support those stages of sleep.
And it's not intrusive. The only thing you're wearing is just the watch that you're probably wearing anyways.
Right. So,
and
yeah.
You get it better.
Exactly. And then you see how you did in the morning. And our wearable is really designed for sleep and stress. So we do a lot more calculations than the consumer wearables because we don't have to worry about battery life, because you don't wear ours during the day, and they need to make sure their batteries last for a week before recharging. We just say, hey, you know what? Use ours for a couple nights and plug it in during the day. So it's simple from that standpoint. But yeah, you're right. It's non-invasive. It's drug-free. We're below the FDA safety levels, so we don't have to worry about regulatory clearance. It's a consumer product.
The takeaway is you feel better. And you've proven it with the stories you talked about, the cancer removal. You just proven theories behind it. That why would you not want to do something so simple?
We did a study of 304 cases where people used it over different periods of time. And we're talking about those 304 cases in total used it 56,765 nights. Okay. So we're not talking about, oh yeah, we did this study for 10 nights.
Yeah.
Okay. 56,000 nighttime sessions. And we did an analysis, and the longer people used it, the greater the deep sleep recovery. So what that tells you is, you've probably heard the term neuroplasticity.
Yeah, you brought it up.
Okay, so the brain changes and it adapts, and so it's literally restoring delta sleep. And you said you're in your late 40s?
Yeah.
Well, people in their late 40s, on average, you may be an exception one way or another, but on average, people in their late 40s have already lost 60 to 70% of their deep sleep. Okay? How would you like it if we could turn that back to back when you were 20?
I'd love it, because I know when you have those good night sleeps, you're focused more the next day. When you don't have that good deep sleep, you're dry, you're brain fogged.
I'm 73, all right? By the time I wasn't able to start using our technology, we didn't have it refined enough until I was 69, so 4 years ago. Okay. Back then, I was getting about 20 minutes of deep sleep a night. All right.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Which is really lousy. All right. And by the way, my sleep had deteriorated so badly that I was only sleeping on average about 3.5 hours a night. Okay.
Okay.
Because deep sleep is the anchor that keeps you asleep. All right. And I would wake up in the middle of the night. You get older, you take some trips to the bathroom. I typically had to take one every night. So after about 3.5 hours, I'd get up, go to the bathroom, and I'd say, I'm wide awake. I'm never going to fall back to sleep. Now, before that, I would get up, go to the bathroom, but still feel tired enough to go back to sleep. But by then, by the time I was 69, I gave up. And so it was 4 cups of coffee a day, every once in a while, more than every once in a while, take a nap. Because you can't live on that little sleep. But I was never a long sleeper. I was typically a 6-hour a night, and that was enough for me. But over time, my delta sleep has returned. I get the delta sleep now of a 30 to 35-year-old, and I'm 73.
And that's just 4 years. 4 years of using your technology.
It returned faster than that.
Okay.
After maybe a couple of years, it gradually got better and better.
Yeah.
Right? But the beauty is, I now sleep on average almost 6 hours a night. Okay, back to where I was with good delta sleep. I don't have to drink any caffeine, all right, during the day, and I don't have to take any naps.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I would miss my nap. I love the weekend nap out in a hammock, out in the sun on a nice
you
warm
could
day.
still take them, but you wouldn't need it. Here's the problem. If you took the nap and you were getting regular sleep, you wouldn't end up sleeping well that night because you'd get some delta sleep during your nap.
The trade-offs though. Yeah, I can see where that would be, but not so good. You want the deep sleep at night. But I think now as you get there, that nap, it's almost like you need it. Your body's telling you need it because you're not getting it at night.
Yeah, that's
And
that's what happens with most people. They're not getting as much sleep as they need. Plus, let me tell you this because most people don't realize this. People, if I said how much sleep do you get at night, and let's say you go to bed at 10 p.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m. They say I've been in bed for 8 hours, so I slept 8 hours. That doesn't work that way. Okay, it's the actual sleep time is typically at least an hour less than the time you're in bed. So
yeah.
that's a big factor.
Well,
And
my
when,
little wearable, when I don't wear it, it tells me what my sleep time was. And you go, oh, I went to bed at 10 o'clock. I got up at 6 o'clock, so there's my 8 hours of sleep. I'm good. I know darn that it took me an hour and a half to tossing and turning. I got up in the bathroom once or twice in the middle of the night. And then I got up before my body naturally wakes up before 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock is just when I got out of bed. But I was awake before that.
yes,
No, Dan, very interesting stuff. And if you ever need a guinea pig, send Soltec my way. I'll be more than happy to tell you how long the battery lasts, tell you what sound waves work great for me, because I do think it's something that we all need more of. We all need to get that restorative sleep.
yeah,
It only the performance. We talk about the athletes,
yeah,
but everybody needs performance. And I'm
yeah,
not talking about the PhD, the PEDs, and all the stuff that you go the wrong way. The healthy kind. And eating, getting good sleep, that transformative, going back, mind over matter, that those things really matter in a point of helping our health, helping our lives. And the technology you guys are developing, I could see it lasting into the future.
yeah,
I could see that being very transformative.
yeah. And the current system is just is essentially the magnetic waves. There's no sound waves in that one.
Yeah, okay. But it still gets you. It still gets you to that point where we all need deep sleep,
Oh yeah,
restorative.
that's the point.
Yep.
Because we know how to deliver what will help you move into that state, which will enhance that state.
Well, Dan, I just want to take a moment to reflect back on what I'm taking away from this conversation because there was a lot of it here, and I want to make sure that the audience walks away with the right things from this. First, great innovation is patient, is being patient. You started Round River in 1997, that is. You named it because you knew there was going to be navigating around curves one lesson at a time. 25 years later, the technology works. Living proof.
Yeah.
Most people would have quit. They called it a day. Nope. The ones who do not quit are the ones who build things that matter. Second, the wearable that everybody uses gives you numbers that make you feel bad. You mentioned that yourself. I wear my watch, tells me, but I don't get the benefits of it. Yours actually does something. The multitasking meditation, the stimulating the rest and digest part of the nervous system that we touched on, all while go out your day. Those are things that you talked about that are beneficial. It's not a product feature that is different category of technology entirely. So you're starting that new innovative front. You're breaching the unknown, so to speak.
Mhm.
The last thing that we talked about, the third thing, that exit planning is not the last thing you think about, it's the first thing. Exclusivity, everybody needs to understand what they're selling. Scarcity, that's a very good thing. And then inevitability. Every operational decision you make either advances or undermines those three things. If you do not know what you're building towards, you're just making noise, right? And
Yeah.
Dan, I just got one final question for you. What did Jerry Rice sign to you in the back?
Oh, Oh,
It looks like you got a sign. Yeah. What's the sign photograph?
easy breathing.
Easy breathing. Now, if you could fast forward to the future, easy breathing with restorative sleep, right? Kind of add that little disclaimer to it at the end. Dan, hey, I really appreciate everything today. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the street about how things actually work. For everybody listening, Dan's company, Soltec Health. Links will be in the notes. Dan, I hope this was worth your time. It definitely was mine. I learned a lot, enjoyed the conversation, and I think there's a lot of great things that we can take away. So, Dan,
Good.
thank you.